Webinars are hot. As a content marketing professional, I've produced hundreds of videos for social and traditional media platforms and currently work with one of the largest podcast networks in the country. So for me, understanding how webinars work in the B2B space is both essential to my professional development and an exciting form of content creation. According to a study commissioned by digital agency Demandwave, 41% of B2B marketers cite webinars as the best marketing tactic for driving revenue. I've set out to discuss webinars with one of the foremost experts in the field, Matt Lay, president of the streaming network in Toronto. Together, we've created this multi-part series of videos and podcasts, the webinar Lessons from the Front Line, or How I Learned to Live with Never Getting a Second Chance with Live Virtual Events. We've all endured one of those webinars, either stiff and scripted or free-form and rambling, where a business leader has asked for your time, but it's clear from the start that the purpose is to sell and not inform. We've signed up, but much of our time is spent either surfing the web or likely even includes a bathroom break. Still, you sit through. The host is one of those foremost experts in the field, and you really need to understand the subject at hand. It's core to how you do your job, you tell yourself. On the other hand, there are those webinars that are an absolute joy. The format is engaging, the interviews are great, the statistics are loaded with information. The subject matter, even if it's dry, is presented in a way that informs and, dare I say, entertains. Matt Lay, welcome to the webinar, Lessons from the Front Line. Today's episode is Anatomy of a Kick-Ass Webinar.
Thanks for having me, Pete. I'm looking forward to this, for sure.
This will be great. This will be a lot of fun. So what's the secret here? Where do we start in creating a webinar that audiences will find useful and engaging?
Well, I think the answer is in the question, right? If we're going to create a webinar that they're going to find useful and engaging, you have to start with them, right? What is it that they want to hear you talk about? What are their needs? I say that because often when people are asked to present their first webinar or they're creating a webinar program, it's more about the topics that they want to talk about, the things they think are going to help their business. The result of which, to quote a friend of mine who I've interviewed a number of times on a topic like this, Ron Tite, is that you end up pitch slapping your audience. It turns into you pitching on your company or your product or your wares. And generally speaking, in the world of content marketing, that's a bad idea.
Yeah.
Right? So you want to start with ideas from them. So where do you get those ideas if you don't have them already? Is talk to the people on the front line. So in my organization, I like to touch the customer pre-sale. I'll be involved in some implementation stuff. I got a good. I'm on the front line, so I can speak to them, and a lot of what I take from those conversations informs not just my webinars, but all of my content marketing. So if you're the speaker, but you're in maybe a larger organization than mine, where you're removed from that front line a bit, you want to go out and speak to your customer success managers. Are a great source. What are the questions that they're getting every single day? What are the struggles that that the clients are facing, and they know about them? Sales reps, what are they being asked about? What are the big questions that come out in their meetings? So anyone who's out there and actually talking to people, that's a great source of information.
They're your front line of understanding exactly what the market wants.
Exactly, yeah. And the caution that I would give on this is that there's also a tendency beyond the pitch slap to cover way too much content. Because you've got an hour, the average webinar viewer will stay for a live webinar for 56 minutes, 30 minutes for the on-demand. So you feel like you got to jam everything in there, like everything you ever wanted to know about social media marketing, but we're afraid to ask. And when you try to cover too broad of a topic, you rarely provide any useful information, right? When we golf, there's the shot that keeps us coming back, because God knows not a lot of us love golfing. And webinars, or I think in all content marketing, there's got to be that point, that bullet that resonates with people and makes them want to come back to your brand for more information and hopefully down the road to buy something.
And really, you're looking for that nugget. You're not looking for, because you're not selling. You're looking to entertain. You want to find that thing that people are going to go, wow.
Yeah, and you want them walking away saying, I got value, and there's that stat, that thing, that idea, that story that they walk away with.
Right. So what types of content usually work best?
Well, you're going to hear me go back to this a lot, is that the medium should lend to great storytelling, right? A webinar has time to get into the entirety of a story. And yet we find ourselves not being great at storytelling in B2B marketing. Well, some people are, but a lot of us aren't, right? We're used to presenting, not telling stories. And so generally speaking, you want to try to find those stories that help tell your point the best. And inherent in corporate storytelling anyways is this idea of the case study. So when we went back and we got inside the data on our customers and we tried to see which types of webinars perform best, the second one was the case study or the working case. Right. People understand the format. This customer has some problem that they might have as well. This vendor and this customer work together to solve said problem. There was a great business outcome and an aftermath that everyone was happy with. Right. So happy, they decided to get together and do a webinar about it and talk about it. And so the audience understands that conflict resolution. It's the way our bedtime stories were told to us. So that helps them, I guess, analyze or synthesize the content in a better way. Right. And in general, you've got the cachet when doing a case of having that customer involved. Right. So you got the two brands, the power of two brands. Interestingly, the number one.
I was going to say.
So the number one, well, it wasn't so much about content when we looked into it. It was the co-marketing webinars when you're bringing 2 or 3 different groups of thought leaders together around a topic. They all come at it from their own perspective. Right. They all market it to their own group, and then you've got your sort of your best performing, if you will, from a numbers perspective webinar. Right. Is that one.
I imagine in a case study, it's useful if it's a blue chip client. It gives you a chance to engage as well, just as a organization trying to sell and trying to keep a client engage with you. It gives you an opportunity to go back to them and say, we want to do a case study. Yep. I want you to appear with me on this webinar, and we're going to talk about this thing, underline for them the success of this thing, but also bring them in and keep them as a partner in this other piece of content, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's generally a win-win for everyone, right? Like, we all want to feel like we're smart. This customer made a smart decision that fixed a problem that they have. But the idea of affiliate marketing has been around for years. It's not unique to webinars, and that's just another example of how that works.
Yeah. Yeah, cool. So what's next? We obviously need to figure out the talent component. What does that look like? Yeah. You need to bring in the right kinds of people. You need to populate.
Yeah, I mean, the webinar is not just about, some people think we start with the PowerPoint, but usually you start with the person, right? That presenter, the guy or girl who's going to be the subject matter expert, the person on this side of the desk.
How important is that? That must be key to the whole thing, is having the right kind of. Like if you bring somebody who can carry it, you already know right away you're knocking it out of the park, right?
Yeah, and I think that it's interesting that you say that. If you bring someone in who can carry it, and because I'm usually on the other side of this, off the desk and out in the not behind the camera, but my customers are sitting here, and you'll see people that are amazing at on a stage when they've got an audience, or people who are the smartest guy in the room. I like to say it's not always the smartest guy in the room who's the best presenter. And then they get into this weird format that we call webinar, and they're not the best.
Right.
Okay. But you want to start with the presenter. Yeah. So the caution that I already laid out there, and I'll tell you a story about it, is it's not always the smartest person in the room that's the best presenter. And so when I was in first year university, I was coming off of the election. I'm going to age myself here. When Jean Chrétien and Jean Charest were duking it out, and Charest looked like the younger, more spry, what do they call it, contender for.
My parents told me about that.
Yeah, fair enough. So I was in Ottawa for the Young Liberal Convention right before I went into school. I go into school. I'm so excited about poli-sci. I'm that kid knocking on doors. I'm wearing my red tie everywhere I go. And I get into my first poli-sci class, and we have an extremely intelligent woman, Dr. Agenstad, who ran the poli-sci department at McMaster University, my alma mater. So she came out to teach us first-year political science, where we're being introduced to the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. There's very little analyzing going on at our level. We just need to know the stuff first. Right. And she's out there, and she's talking about it, and then she'll say something, and she'll stop, and she'll mumble, and she'll say, oh, you won't learn that for 4 or 5 years. It was a terrible experience for me. It actually made me switch, and I switched programs, and I went to economics. It was just so bad. it wasn't that she really was the smartest person in the department. I mean, she's a published author. She was dictating curriculum at the university. She's a wonderful woman, but it wasn't right for her speaking to us. And this can happen in a webinar as well. The person who is the practice group leader, the person who invented that AI or whatever it might be, may be too high level to speak to the audience that you are talking to.
Right.
And so finding someone else within the organization might be a better presenter.
And make that, and bring that person, the smart person, in as a guest, potentially.
Well, so that's another methodology is if it has to be that person,
Right.
and then sometimes it does, right? If it had to be Dr. Ashenstad, because we were not talking about general political science, we were talking about, I don't know what we were talking about, constitutional challenges to some new law Justin Trudeau is putting in, and it had to be her that spoke, and she wasn't the best presenter or she was too high level. Now it's the role of somebody else. That's the guy in your seat. And so we've been saying it for a very long time that in a webinar is always benefited by a host. Now that host doesn't have to be a professional like yourself, but anyone in that role who is keeping track of the time, ensuring that when a presenter goes off on a tangent that maybe is not relevant, they can bring them back. Ensuring that the main topics of said webinar get handled, because that's the other thing that can happen in this format is we've been dealing with this question for quite a long time, is we can go off on a tangent that maybe isn't germane to what we're trying to accomplish. And so the host can do a lot. And the host can also elevate the talent. I've seen this so many times where people are nervous when they sit down, they've never done this sort of thing before, and the host can put them at ease and help carry it to make it a little bit more engaging.
Right.
The final thing, if you've read anything I've ever written, and I'm sure throughout this series that you're doing, we'll talk about this again.
A little reading.
A little reading. Is that this idea of us, even the question and answer, is a participatory format that helps our audience feel like they're part of something.
Yeah.
Call-in radio show, the CNN sort of talk show where people are tweeting and or calling in to be a part of it. It makes it easier for them to participate in the webinar if they feel like they're part of our conversation and not just a bystander watching.
Yeah. It's interesting. In my university, my first class in journalism school, the teacher came in, also bright woman, walked into the class and said, "None of you are going to work in journalism."
Amazing.
And you're just sitting, I just paid my tuition, I'm sitting there looking at her going, anyway, but that's the same thing, right? She knew so much and should not have been teaching.
Yeah,
right?
and you want to say to her, eat your heart out, look what I'm doing right now,
exactly,
right?
Exactly. So what about formatting content? Typically you have a bunch of assets, data to present, a PowerPoint or an infographic. How do you choose? Because you alluded to this earlier, you want a nugget, right?
Yeah.
You don't want to put the whole thing out there, or do you?
Well, my opinion is when you're watching a news broadcast and Anderson Cooper is referencing some tweet, or maybe not a tweet's a bad example, something that some politician said or a ruling or whatever it might be, you don't get the whole ruling beside him on screen. You get that little tidbit that gets called out and gets highlighted.
A little quote
from it, right? And if the idea of that it is a webinar and it's not a white paper. If it was a white paper, you could have it all there. Why even talk about it?
Yeah.
The idea is you want them to listen to you, tell your stories, or work them through it. That you want to be a minimalist with your PowerPoint.
Yeah.
And I'm sorry, PowerPoint isn't going anywhere. It's a part of webinars, whether you're doing a video webinar, an audio webinar. There's some level of displaying visual information that helps the audience learn. This is a fact.
Yeah.
So it has to be there.
And you have to have visuals because if you're just looking at a person talking the whole time,
and
your mind will wander. Right?
80-90% of webinars, depending on where you're at, are just audio anyways. It's like what we're it's like a podcast, right? And so you want to have that visual element. And so, some of the things that I always say is you want to find the fewest words, if you can go with no bullets, that's the most amazing thing possible. The fewest words, the most striking images, and the best medium to tell your story, right? So if you asked me that question and this was a webinar, I would want, instead of talking about it, I would want to show 3 great slides from people that I thought really did a good job.
Yeah.
But sometimes slides aren't the answer. Sometimes the answer is a video that's been shot. Why should I say it when someone else can say it better than me? Sometimes it's a graphic only that you're talking to for a fair bit of time and working people through said graphic.
Right.
I've seen memes be very effective in this regard. Right, they're light. They tell exactly what everyone is thinking. So you want to start thinking about your presentation in a highly visual way, which a lot of people have started doing for when they're in conferences and stuff. So that's a good thing.
Yeah.
Right. But next is you want to recognize the medium in which you're presenting in. So in a webinar, we have a ton of opportunity to incorporate things outside of presentation. So polls, I mean, they're a simple answer. Over 35% of audience members will click on them. So feeding those through while you're asking out those open-ended questions to your audience is a good thing. If you are talking about something that you know you can't get to, right? That thing we were going to learn in four years about the Constitution that Dr. Agenstein was talking about in my first year poli-sci class, she could stop and say, you know what, it's not for today's conversation, but you can download a case study on that, or you can go to this governmental website and read about that if you decide that you want to do more. And so now when you're reaching hundreds, and it literally is, in North America, over 215 people is the average viewership for a live webinar. You're reaching hundreds when you do these things. Is you're going to have people who need that level of granularity, who maybe are at a fourth year level, right?
Yep.
You don't get to ask them their experience before they sign up for your webinar. And then you got the people who are hearing about the Constitution, the Bill of Rights for the first time, who aren't ready for that.
Right.
So offering them the choice to be able to dive deeper into the topic through downloadable links, most platforms have that, or linking them out or directing them to other websites or other places where they can get more information, is a power of that medium versus a lot of other ones, right?
When you've got that wide a range, that disparity, obviously you can't get too deep into it, but you also don't want to just be doing whatever the subject is 101, right? You need to make your choices in terms of how to be simple enough for the people who really are just trying to wrap their brains around the subject, but not bore the crap out of these other people.
I don't know. Everything I ever know about SEO, I learned in one presentation. And I know enough to hold a conversation with marketers. Well, I shouldn't say that. I used to know enough to hold a conversation with marketers about SEO back, I think, when it was in its infancy.
Yeah.
I knew the understanding of keyword analysis. I had a base understanding of all of this stuff. And so I learned that in a presentation called SEO for the CEO at when we were on the Profit Hot 50 list. When you're on the list as a fast-growing company in Canada, you go to this growth camp and you get to pick what presentation you want to go to. I went to this guy's presentation. He started it by saying that when we leave, we will get a kit. And that kit will basically encapsulate everything that he talked about in that presentation. He said, go home, give it to your marketing team or whoever works on your SEO, and if they follow every step in that kit, they will be on page 1 of Google. And then he went on to explain that page 1 means nothing. You need to be number 1 if SEO is going to actually, get you results.
Right.
And so he basically went through and provided us with not everything there is to know about SEO, because SEO had already gone well beyond that. But he provided us the base on which we could go out and start trying to optimize our websites. And clearly, if we wanted to do a really good job and be number 1, we would call his company and hire him to get us to the next level. Right. So I like that as an example because I walked away with a really good knowledge of SEO, right? And if I was a young budding marketer who wanted to be in the SEO game, I would learn the staples of what SEO is. But I knew that I was just getting started in that presentation. So I walked away with something. And I think that's what you always want to do. When I'm hosting webinars, which I do for customers sometimes, and I get the content, and sometimes I'm dealing with like a psychologist who's talking about, I don't know what they're talking about half the time when it starts because I'm not a medical doctor. When I start getting into it, I say to them, if the audience could only walk away with one thing, what do you need them to walk away with? And then I always try and go back to that as I'm going through to make sure that they say everyone needs to walk away with this one point. Are they focusing on that? And we all need to do that so they have that thing that they're walking away with that says, wow, that was worth my hour.
Right.
I learned something.
What about promotions? How do you ensure that people are showing up? I worked in an events business. There was things you did, traditional things you did, or using social media and things like that to make sure you're driving people selling tickets.
Yeah.
What are the tricks the same? Is there a special way of doing this thing for webinars?
So before I get into that, and a lot of it is the same, but before I get into that, I think people need to know what they should expect, right? So often I drop numbers like the average, the index. And the index for viewership in North America is just over 200 live viewers, over 500 registrants. Unlike your physical events,
Right.
you don't sell out seats and get near 80 to 90% fill rates.
Right.
Just everyone gets it now that not only is there no selling out of a webinar, that there's an on-demand version of it.
Right.
So less than 50% of people show up
Right.
who register, right?
And that's not a worry. Then you get your 200 live.
Yeah.
And
If you're anywhere near 50% on live, you should not be discouraged.
Right.
And if you're around 200 viewers, don't be discouraged.
Right.
Are there ways of doing better? For sure. Like we would go out and talk to our top 9% of our customers. These are all people who have well over 1,000 live viewers and well over 1,000 on-demand viewers. So they have more viewers, and their index is even better than everybody else
Right.
on what they're getting. But yeah, if you don't feel bad about those data points, and there are things you can do to kind of to improve it.
Right.
So one of the things is, you talked about physical events, right? So your goal when you're hosting a physical events is to get every seat filled as soon as possible,
Yeah.
right?
And you're selling tickets.
You're selling tickets,
And
yeah.
you've got sponsors, and you want those sponsors to see the people because they're
Then
paying you
more
money.
people will sponsor, and you can add new sponsorship levels when
Yeah.
you're sold out. And,
Some would say in live events, that's all that's important. What happens actually in terms of the information, and I'm sure you've been to events
Yep.
like that. You're going, okay, well,
doesn't
this
matter.
is useless.
Well, in a webinar, it's different because those people that signed up for your physical event 4, 5 weeks, 6, the early bird ticket guys, the guys who are really into it, in the web world, those are the people who are least likely to attend. Because if they commit to an hour of their time, some distant date in the future, 4 or 5 weeks into the future, they're less likely to actually show up because
Really?
they don't know what's going on in their calendar.
Right.
It's the people who register the week of that are going to be there.
Right.
So, like a physical event, you want to have a promotional schedule that's fairly long. So we say 4 to 5 weeks for a webinar is ideal, even though those people who register 4 to 5 weeks out may not attend.
Right.
It's getting into the minds of people that this is coming up and this is happening and they should attend.
Right.
So that first drop on an email that happens 4 or 5 weeks out, I might look at it and say, maybe. I'll open it
Yeah.
and I'll look at it. Nah, I'm not going to commit now. I got no idea what my
Right.
week looks like.
You've planted the seed.
You planted the seed.
Yeah.
By the time the second drop comes, I'm a little bit more, my week's a little bit more solid, right? I might know I can't attend and decide not to register for the event because I can't.
Right.
And then the week of, I get the email, my week's, got some cancellations, I'm good, now I get to attend set webinar,
Right.
I sign up and I show up. So you want to have a communications plan like that. Now the issue that we see is that in a world of email marketing where the dreaded unsubscribe, we don't want to over communicate to people, over promote, is that there's this feeling that they don't leave enough room for themselves in that final week. So we always say you want to finish really, really strong if you're going to get people out to the webinar. When we do our email communications in that final week, we do a split where we hit the whole list of people who haven't registered, some 10,000 records. And the people who have been active within the campaign but have not registered, they're getting an email from me, or the speaker, or not just me, whoever the speaker is. So we'll send it out from them. And then the others will get more of a standard kind of invite. At the same time, during that week, all sales are linking to the webinar in their communications, talking about it, and the speakers or speaker, and if it's me, are on LinkedIn doing invitations to people going, hey, check this out this week, that
Right.
kind of thing. So we get a huge spike. We get better than 50% of our viewers register that week ourselves, which is a little bit above the norm. You usually
Right.
get about 40% of your audience coming in that
Right.
final week.
But there are numbers you should be looking at, like there's 20%
Yeah.
sort of long in the longest process, and it builds kind of an opposite long tail.
Right, but the problem is that if you don't communicate that final week and just expect people are going to register, it's not going to happen.
Right.
You got to leave room for that promotional schedule, or else you're always going to feel like your webinar is underperforming.
And you got to create a sense of excitement, right? You got to be, as you get closer and closer, you got to.
Yeah, your
Be-
communications should not be the same every time. You should kind of look to amp them up, but I also caution people, I mean, a sense of excitement. Again, it's not a physical event. Everyone knows. They can tune in later.
Oh my God, it's coming.
It's coming, yeah. I'll never get to hear this again.
Yeah.
No, you'll get to hear it anytime you want.
Do you give away stuff in the promotion?
Like to show up?
No, like here is an example of what you're going to get, or here, start to publish pieces of information that is tangentially related or directly related to what's happening. Is that part of the whole promotion process?
Yeah, when done really well, it is.
Yeah.
In our case, we're a webinar first marketing organization, and I don't think you'll ever be at Serious Decisions or at a conference where anyone says they're a webinar first organization, but because it's a dirty little secret that many people are.
Right.
And what I mean by webinar first is that these presentations organically grow and build from client presentations and for things that we're doing. And then someone's like, oh my God, that's really good. And that's really useful. So it goes from a boardroom or a conference or just internal meetings, and it flips to now it's a webinar.
Right.
And then when the webinar is done, now we are like, oh, this is great. We're going to do blogs and ebooks and videos on this topic because it is so good and people like to consume content in different ways. And so, generally speaking, there are other content assets that you can provide to people. In our world, we do everything simulated live.
Right.
We produce thousands of live events for customers where the heat is on and it has to be perfect. And so when we do ours, we pre-record them. We pretend they're live. They go out at a certain time. I don't hide it at all from anyone in that. And so we can actually leak out some of the interview questions or some of the videos from the webinar can go out early to help fuel that registration. Yeah.
Right.
So you've got the promotional schedule. But then you've also got the people who did register. Remember I said that those people who come in early maybe don't show up? Mm-hmm. And so you got to have two paths of communication occurring. The one path is the people who have not yet registered, and you got to do all of your own email marketing for that. But then there's getting the people to actually show up who did register.
Right.
And so our data indicates that 2 days before and 2 hours before is the best time to remind people. You want to remind them a couple times. These emails will often not come from you, but from your platform, so that you're not worried about spamming or anything like that. People have opted into this webinar. You're just helping them remember to actually show up.
Right.
And getting people out doesn't stop at the end of the webinar. And that's one of the biggest mistakes that I see from people is they're feeling that the live is the only thing that matters.
Right.
We host live webinars so we can have a dialogue with our audience. And I say, oh yeah? In general, over 13,000 webinars that we looked at, less than 10% of people asked you questions. Are you guys getting, everyone asking you a question?
Right.
And if they do, it's only a 60-minute webinar. How many questions do you actually get to answer?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And how many are actually going to be relevant to not just the rambling, not even a question, but a statement?
Exactly. So we all know that of the 90-something% of people who didn't ask a question, many of those are just as valuable of leads or just as valuable of viewers as the 9% who did. And so on-demand has that same amount of value. And so one of the other keys of getting your index up or your viewership up is respecting the on-demand, ensuring that within 24 hours that archive is posted and that people who registered but couldn't view, and I don't say didn't view, I say couldn't view, because oftentimes when people sign up, they have an intention of viewing, especially those who came that week up, but something came up in their life, right?
Yeah.
So you got to get an email out to them going, this thing you wanted to see, you can now see it. It's recorded, and you can view it here. Here you go.
Right.
And then they will take action. You generally get a 25% lift in viewership just by sending out that email. Then what we generally recommend is you go into a period of passive promotion where your social media says, oh, we had this recording or we had this great webinar, you should kind of check it out. And then we actually recommend, depending on where you got on your index or where you got from your viewership numbers, is that 2 weeks after it, you re-promote it. You either re-promote the on-demand or you do what we call a command performance or a rebroadcast. Right. Because it's not about how many people you get through your webinar at Wednesday at 2 p.m., which, by the way, happens to be the best time to hold a webinar. It's the It's the amount of people who get through it in the course of its lifetime. And we usually see the most people get through it in that sort of 3 to 4 weeks
Right.
around it. And then there's a trailing effect throughout the rest of the year if you keep it hosted. But you got to optimize to make that happen. It won't happen on its own without those promotional schedules being followed.
Why Wednesday, 2 p.m.?
I don't know. My assumption is that it hits all major time zones within North America. I mean, Wednesday 2 p.m. is marginally better than Tuesday at 2 p.m.
So it's 2 p.m. seems to be the thing.
And
midweek, 2 p.m.
Yeah.
after lunch.
It's been 3-4 years we've seen it across customers.
Right.
There was an argument this year. There was a major webinar conference, if you can believe it, in San Francisco, Webinar World, that I was a part of. And we, over drinks, we talked about, did we influence that, or did it happen organically?
Right.
You know what I mean? If everyone's always talking about Wednesday at 2, did Wednesday at 2 just become the time, the way that bad family comedy became the Friday night when I was a kid?
Right.
TJF Fridays. That just
Right.
happened because they did it, or did we want to be sitting around watching Full House
Right.
every Friday? I don't know.
Good marketing always taps into what people are already doing, right?
Yeah,
So
generally.
That's how these things work. Okay. You want to talk anything else about promotion, or should we move on to the big challenge?
Let's go. Before we get to the big challenge, one thing
Okay.
that I'll say is that I talked a lot about people who opened versus people who didn't and all of that, and so I think that the whole idea of getting people out in the webinar world is enhanced by integration with marketing automation, and I'm sure all promotions are, but in this case even more than ever. If you have a level of integration, your campaigns around webinars get a lot easier. Remember, when you're promoting a physical event, that was the only event you were promoting.
Right.
If you're promoting webinars, you could have one today, one on Friday, one next Wednesday. Different segments of your list or your client population are invited. At that same conference, I met a girl part of a 4-person team who deliver 120 webinars a month. Right? So they got to have this integration going to
Yeah.
make it easier,
Yeah.
and it actually makes it more intelligent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Interesting. Amazing. Okay. So at the end of every episode,
Yep.
I'm going to throw a challenge to you,
Yeah.
something to try to either trip you up, hold your feet to the fire.
Yeah.
So here's our first challenge. You and I have spoken on several occasions.
Right.
I've read several interviews that you've been quoted in. You really hang your hat on some very, very specific statistics.
Yeah.
But every company has different DNA. Every company that you deal with, every company I deal with has unique audiences, specific targets, different criteria that they're trying to navigate around.
Right.
How can you be so confident that the statistics that you regularly come out with are going to speak for every business?
I mean, that is a good question, right? And the simple answer is the sample size. But I'm going to try and illustrate this in a different way. I'm going to close down your laptop for
I was
a
wondering
second.
what the
Cards, yeah.
I thought maybe in between takes we'd play some gin rummy.
Maybe, yeah, you'd probably win. But yeah, this summer I was away with my son, and we were in Algonquin Park, and it was a rainy day, and we're trying to figure out what we were going to do. We weren't in Algonquin Park. We were at a resort near Algonquin, and we went into the park
Right.
for the days. But it still rained,
Right.
and we still couldn't go in.
It always rains in Algonquin.
It always rains, right? So we had done a bunch of hiking, and so we decided that we were going to learn card tricks. So I'm going to start while I answer your challenge with this card trick. Is I'm going to ask you to basically pick any card from this group here.
Can I look at it?
You can look at it, pick the one you like and the one that you love.
Can I show it to the camera?
Yeah, show it to the camera. Don't show it to me. I don't want to see the card.
Okay, and where do I put it?
Just put it anywhere in. Shuffle.
Anywhere back in.
Yep,
Not
anywhere.
in the same spot.
Doesn't matter. Shuffle the deck. Do whatever you want. Make
Shuffle
sure
the
that
deck.
there's no way I could have possibly known where that card is.
Shuffle the deck like my old man taught me to shuffle the deck.
So while you're doing that, to basically to answer your question is when I talk about these stats, I'm talking about stats, and I often say what works for me, because I think it's important that I actually drink the Kool-Aid and I actually follow these data points or these promotional schedules and that sort of thing. But the data comes from over 13,000 webinars. Okay, and the way that we pick the webinars, now while I do that, I want you to look for your card, okay? It's going to show up in one of these 3 piles. So when you're...
Do I react when I see the
No,
card?
do not. Just remember
blank
it.
face.
Just blank face,
Don't go
poker
like,
face. No, I'm not even looking at you anyways. I'm trying to remember what I was talking about. Oh,
Right.
so we're looking at 13,000 webinars. And when we look at 13,000 webinars, which pile is it in?
I don't know. That one.
This one here? All right. So when we look at 13,000 webinars, we're looking at all webinars that people do not have to attend. Okay, so data on people who do not have to attend the webinar. And what I mean by that is a marketing webinar, nobody has to attend. They have the option of showing up or not showing up. And we focus on those because it's on those where things like time of day, promotional schedules, and things like that really, really matter. Do you remember which one it's in now? I got it. So
I'm glad I got a second chance because I wasn't actually sure about the first one.
Well, I found it anyways. We're gonna do one more of these, okay? Because I didn't think it was gonna be in that one, so now I gotta do another.
Oh, you gotta do a workaround.
I gotta do a workaround here. So I'm going on the fly.
Okay.
So because we test those types of webinars, then what we can do is we can just put it into individualized practice. So
Right.
here's an example. Which one's it in? Okay. So here's an example. Is we decided, so we know that 50% of people show up or towards the end of our promotional cycle. So then we asked ourselves, is it even important for us to do the early promotions, right? If they all show up at that time, does it really matter? And so we tried to just do it on the last week. And guess what happened? What? Didn't work. Sorry. I lost my train there. 1, 2. That's your card.
Ha! That's my card.
I have no idea how that's your card, but it was just math. It just works every single time.
It just works every single time.
It's the 11th card when I flip it over at the end of this program, which is what we've, in our own data sets, have proved about a lot of these other points, is that it just works.
Right.
I try to back it up with psychological reasoning that we need to know about the webinar before we'll commit to it 3 weeks down the road.
Right.
But I'm not really in the head of the person who says yes.
Right.
I am actually philosophizing or trying to figure out what happens around this data set that I know to be true.
Right.
So I do hang my hat on the data and the stats. Because I think that we need to be data driven in the decisions that we make. I am always open to and I am always pragmatic in speaking to a customer because I know that they are all different.
Right.
I know that their audience is different. But generally speaking, anyone who follows the data-driven approach to promoting webinars or the data-driven approach to getting people to engage, and we'll talk about this later about what people like to do versus what they don't like to do, see improvements.
Right.
And as marketers, as communicators, as business people, that's what we're looking. We're looking for a 1x, a 2x, a 3, whatever that improvement is. And so sticking to the data points will generally get you an improvement. And then from there, you just keep going up and keep going up.
Right. So it's not just magic.
It's not magic at all.
It's math.
This is math and statistics. So
Because there was a time when you do that sort of thing, and next thing you know, you're tied to a post somewhere.
Yes.
So-
Well, I admitted it. You even saw me counting out the 11. I think the illusion was lost.
The illusion was lost when you
at
started
that
counting.
point in time. So.
So, well, that concludes our podcast.
Okay.
Matthew, thank you very much for coming, and we're going to do a few more of these. We're going to
Yeah.
talk about a lot of webinar things
Yeah.
in the coming episodes. So stay tuned, and let's we'll move on to the next one.
Looking forward to it.
Great.